Hello there, and welcome. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've had a long day, or maybe you're the kind of person who likes falling asleep to stories told around a fire rather than counting sheep. Either way, this journey is for you. You've got nothing to do but rest. Let your mind relax, your breathing slow, and your body grow light as if gravity itself has softened. Because tonight, we're gathering around the campfire with the Van der Linde gang. We're going to hear the stories they tell each other when the day's work is done, when the stars come out, and when the only light comes from the flames dancing in the darkness. These are stories of the Old West, of outlaws and dreamers, of love and loss, of the world that was and the world that's coming. In Red Dead Redemption 2, the gang's camp is more than just a place to sleep. It's a home, a community, a family gathered against the darkness. And around the campfire, that family shares stories. Some are funny, some are sad, some are tall tales that grow taller with each telling. Tonight we'll hear them all, drifting from one story to the next like embers rising into the night sky. And just before we begin, if these calm stories help you unwind or give you a quiet way to end your day, consider liking and subscribing. It helps others find their way here too. The story of how Dutch met Hosea. It was sometime in the early 1870s, in a town whose name has been forgotten by everyone except the two men who met there. Dutch van der Linde was young then, barely into his 20s, full of fire and ideas about freedom and justice. He was running a small con, pretending to be a travelling preacher collecting donations for a church that didn't exist. It was working well enough until he tried to con the wrong man. Hosea Matthews was older, more experienced, and running his own con in the same town. He was posing as a wealthy investor, promising returns on investments that would never materialize. When Dutch approached him for a donation, Hosea recognized a fellow conman immediately. Instead of exposing Dutch, Hosea played along, making an extravagant donation with money he'd conned from someone else. That night they found themselves in the same saloon, each having successfully fleeced the town. They recognized each other across the room, two wolves who'd been hunting the same territory. Instead of fighting over it, they bought each other drinks and talked until dawn. By morning, they decided to work together. Dutch had the vision and the charisma. Hosea had the experience and the caution. Together, they'd be unstoppable. That partnership lasted over 20 years. Through good times and bad, through success and failure, through the building of a family and the slow unravelling of everything they'd created. But it all started in that forgotten town, with two con men recognising something in each other that neither could find alone. The story of Arthur's first robbery. Arthur Morgan was just a boy when Dutch and Hosea found him, maybe 14 or 15, surviving on the streets through petty theft and desperation. He was angry and scared and didn't trust anyone. But Dutch and Hosea saw something in him, some potential that even Arthur didn't know he had. His first real robbery with the gang was a disaster. They were hitting a stagecoach on a lonely road, a simple job that should have been easy. Arthur's role was to hold the horses while Dutch and Hosea handled the passengers. But when the shooting started, when the driver pulled a gun and everything went wrong, Arthur panicked. He let go of the horses and they bolted, leaving the gang stranded miles from anywhere. Dutch was furious. Hosea was disappointed. Arthur was sure they'd abandon him, leave him behind like everyone else had. But that night, around the campfire, Dutch sat down next to Arthur and told him a story about his own first robbery, which had gone even worse. Hosea added his own tale of early failure. They weren't angry, they were teaching. Everyone fails at first. What matters is what you learn from it. Arthur never forgot that lesson. He became one of the most capable outlaws in the West, but he never forgot that he'd started as a scared boy who let the horses run. It kept him humble, it made him patient with others who were still learning, and it bound him to Dutch and Hosea with a loyalty that would last until the very end. The legend of the ghost train. Uncle swears this story is true, though Uncle swears a lot of things are true that probably aren't. But the gang loves to hear him tell it, especially on dark nights when the fire is low and the shadows are long. There's a train that runs through the heartlands on certain nights, Uncle says. You can hear it coming from miles away, the whistle echoing across the plains. But when you look for it, there's nothing there. No engine, no cars, no tracks even. Just the sound of a train that doesn't exist, rushing through the darkness toward a destination no living person knows. Uncle claims he saw it once, years ago, when he was younger and braver, and hadn't yet discovered the medicinal properties of whiskey. He was camped alone in the heartlands, and he heard the whistle around midnight. He looked up and saw it, a train made of pale light, transparent as morning mist, rushing across the prairie where no tracks had ever been laid. The engineer was a skeleton in a conductor's cap. The passengers were shadows pressed against windows that weren't there. The train passed within 100 yards of Uncle's camp, and as it passed he felt a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Then it was gone, vanishing into the night, leaving only silence and the smell of coal smoke that faded before he could be sure he'd really smelled it. No one believes Uncle, of course, but on certain nights, when the wind is right, you can almost hear a distant whistle echoing across the heartlands, and everyone around the fire falls silent, listening, wondering if maybe Uncle's story isn't as tall as it seems, the tale of Hosea's greatest con. Hosea doesn't like to brag, but when the gang asks nicely, he'll tell the story of his greatest con. It happened in St. Denis years before the events of the game, when the city was younger and Hosea was bolder. He posed as a European count, complete with a fake accent and forged credentials. He rented the finest suite in the finest hotel, ordered the most expensive wines, and let it be known that he was looking to invest his family's fortune in American enterprises. The wealthy elite of St. Denis fell over themselves to court his favour. For 3 months, Hosea lived like royalty. He attended balls and galas. He dined with mayors and magnates. He accepted gifts and bribes from people hoping to secure his investment. He even had a brief romance with a society widow who found his accent irresistible. When he finally left St. Denis, he took with him enough money to fund the gang for a year. But more than that, he took the satisfaction of having fooled an entire city, of having walked among the wealthy and powerful and taken them for everything they had. The wealthy of St. Denis never knew they'd been conned. They thought the Count had simply returned to Europe, and they spoke fondly of him for years afterward. Hosea tells this story with a twinkle in his eye, and the gang listens with admiration and amusement. It's a reminder that crime doesn't always require guns, that sometimes the most effective weapon is a good story and the confidence to tell it. The story of how John got his scars. John Marston's face tells a story before he ever opens his mouth. The scars that cross his features are impossible to miss, and everyone who meets him wonders how he got them. Around the campfire, when the whiskey is flowing and the mood is right, John will sometimes tell the tale. It was wolves. John was young and stupid, out alone in the wilderness when he should have been with the gang. He'd had an argument with Dutch about something he can't even remember now, and he'd ridden off in anger, determined to prove he didn't need anyone. He made camp in wolf territory without knowing it. In the middle of the night they came for him, a whole pack, hungry and fearless, drawn by the smell of his cooking. John fought them off as best he could, but there were too many. They dragged him down, tore at his face, would have killed him if Arthur hadn't come looking for him. Arthur found John by following the sounds of snarling and screaming. He rode into the pack with guns blazing, scattering the wolves and pulling John onto his horse. John doesn't remember much after that, just pain and darkness and Arthur's voice telling him to hold on. He woke up days later in camp, his face bandaged, Hosea sitting beside him. The scars healed, but they never faded. John wears them now as a reminder of his own foolishness, of what happens when pride overrides sense of the debt he owes to Arthur for saving his life. When John finishes the story, he usually takes a long drink and stares into the fire. The scars don't bother him anymore, he says. They're part of who he is. But sometimes, on quiet nights, he runs his fingers across them and remembers the sound of wolves howling in the darkness, the legend of the treasure of Flatiron Lake. Javier tells this story with the passion of a true believer, his eyes bright with the possibility of riches just waiting to be found. It's a story he heard in Mexico from an old man who swore it was true, who claimed his grandfather had been there when it happened. During the Civil War, a Union payroll train was carrying gold to pay the troops, but the train never reached its destination. Somewhere near Flatiron Lake, Confederate raiders attacked it. The battle was fierce and bloody, and when the smoke cleared, everyone was dead. The gold was never found. The old man told Javier that his grandfather was one of the raiders, the only one who survived the battle. With his dying breath, he told his son where the gold was hidden, and that son told his son, and so on until the secret reached Javier's ears in a cantina in Nuevo Paraíso. The gold is still there, Javier insists, buried somewhere near the lake, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. He's looked for it himself, spent days combing the shoreline, diving in the murky water, following every clue and rumour. He hasn't found it yet, but he knows it's there. He can feel it. The gang listens to Javier's story with varying degrees of belief. Some think he's chasing shadows. Others wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's something to it. But everyone enjoys the telling. The way Javier's voice rises with excitement, the way he gestures toward the lake, as if the gold might surface at any moment. Whether the treasure exists or not, the story serves its purpose. It gives the gang something to dream about, a possibility of riches that might solve all their problems. And in the hard life of an outlaw, sometimes dreams are as valuable as gold. The ghost of Shady Belle. When the gang makes camp at Shady Belle, the old plantation house that's seen better days, the stories come naturally. The place has a history, and history leaves ghosts behind. Tilly knows the stories better than anyone, having heard them from the local people who remember when the plantation was in its prime. The house was built by a wealthy family before the war, she says. They owned hundreds of slaves, worked them in the fields, treated them like property instead of people. The master of the house was particularly cruel, a man who took pleasure in others' pain. When the war came, when the slaves were freed, many of them left, but some stayed, having nowhere else to go. The master couldn't accept the new world. He raged against the changes, refused to pay wages, tried to keep his former slaves in bondage through debt and intimidation. One night they'd had enough. They rose up against him, and in the struggle, the house caught fire. The master died in the flames, along with several others. Now, Tilly says, on certain nights, you can see him walking the halls of the ruined house, a figure in a white suit pacing back and forth, still trying to maintain control over a world that no longer exists. The local people avoid the place after dark. They say the ghost is angry, violent, dangerous to anyone who disturbs his eternal vigil. The gang members glance toward the house as Tilly tells her story. The windows are dark, but sometimes, in the flicker of firelight, they seem to move. It's probably just shadows, just the wind moving the curtains. But in a place with so much history, so much pain, it's easy to believe that some things refuse to rest. The story of Dutch's silver tongue. Dutch van der Linde can talk his way out of anything, or into anything depending on what the situation requires. The gang has seen him do it countless times, watched him charm lawmen and con marks and convince enemies to become allies. But the story they love best is the one about the preacher's daughter. It happened in a small town in Kansas years ago, when Dutch was younger and even more reckless than he is now. The gang needed supplies, but they were broke, and the local sheriff was suspicious. Dutch decided to try a different approach. He cleaned himself up, put on his best clothes, and presented himself to the local preacher as a travelling minister. The preacher was delighted to meet a fellow man of the cloth. He invited Dutch to dinner, to stay the night, to preach at Sunday service. Dutch accepted graciously, spinning tales of his missionary work among the heathen Indians, his efforts to bring civilization to the frontier. The preacher had a daughter, a beautiful young woman who was immediately taken with the charming stranger. Dutch, never one to miss an opportunity, began courting her with poetry and promises. Within a week they were engaged. Within 2 weeks the preacher was planning to make Dutch his successor. Dutch played the role perfectly. He preached sermons that moved the congregation to tears. He counselled the troubled and comforted the grieving. He was everything a minister should be, except honest. The whole time he was planning the gang's next move, using his position to gather information about the town's wealth and defences. The con might have continued indefinitely, but Dutch's conscience, or perhaps his restlessness, got the better of him. One night he left a note explaining that God had called him to minister to the Indians, and he vanished into the darkness. The preacher's daughter was heartbroken. The congregation felt betrayed. But Dutch had gotten what he came for: supplies, information, and a story that would entertain the gang for years to come. When Dutch finishes this story, he always adds that he sometimes wonders what would have happened if he'd stayed, if he'd given up the outlaw life for love and respectability. But then he looks around the fire at his chosen family, and he knows he made the right choice. The gang is his congregation now, and the frontier is his church. The Ballad of Black Belle. Sadie Adler tells this story with particular relish, her eyes gleaming with admiration for a woman who refused to be anyone's victim. Black Belle was a legend in her own time, an outlaw who could outshoot, outride, and outwit any man who challenged her. Belle started as a saloon girl in a rough frontier town, Sadie says. She was young and pretty and thought she could make an honest living serving drinks and entertaining customers. But the men in that town had other ideas. They thought a woman alone was fair game, something to be used and discarded. The first man who tried to force himself on Belle got a knife between the ribs for his trouble. The second got a bullet. Word spread quickly that Belle wasn't to be trifled with, but instead of leaving her alone, the men of the town decided she needed to be taught a lesson. They came for her one night, a dozen of them, thinking their numbers would overwhelm her. They were wrong. Belle had been preparing for this moment, had turned her room above the saloon into a fortress. She had guns hidden everywhere, ammunition stockpiled, escape routes planned. The battle lasted all night. Belle picked them off one by one, using her knowledge of the building to outmaneuver them. By dawn, half the men were dead and the rest were fleeing. Belle walked out of that saloon with her head held high, took the best horse in town and rode off into legend. For years after, Belle roamed the frontier, robbing banks and trains, always staying one step ahead of the law. She was generous to those who helped her, merciless to those who crossed her. She became a symbol of what a woman could be if she refused to accept the world's limitations. No one knows what happened to Belle in the end. Some say she retired to Mexico with enough money to live like a queen. Others say she died in a shootout with bounty hunters, going down fighting like she'd lived. But Sadie prefers to think she's still out there somewhere, still free, still showing the world that a woman can be anything she chooses to be. When Sadie finishes Belle's story, the women around the fire sit a little straighter and the men look at them with new respect. It's a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. The mystery of the missing stagecoach. Charles Smith doesn't tell many stories, but when he does, they're worth hearing. This one happened to him personally, during his wandering days before he joined the gang. He was travelling alone through the desert, following an old trail that was supposed to lead to a mining town. He came across a stagecoach stopped in the middle of nowhere. The horses were gone, but the coach was intact, sitting in the sand like it had just arrived. Charles approached carefully, expecting trouble, but found something stranger than bandits or broken wheels. The coach was empty, but it was set for passengers. Luggage was stowed properly. Personal items were scattered on the seats as if people had just stepped out for a moment. There was even a half-eaten meal, still fresh, as if the passengers had been interrupted mid-bite. Charles searched the area for tracks, for signs of what had happened. He found the hoof prints of the horses leading away, but no human tracks at all. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of where the passengers and driver had gone. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. He waited until dark, thinking the passengers might return. But as night fell, the desert grew cold and strange. Charles heard sounds that didn't belong, voices calling from empty air, the creak of wagon wheels where no wagon travelled, the jingle of harness where no horses ran. Charles left at first light, taking nothing from the coach, disturbing nothing. He never learned what happened to those passengers, never found an explanation for their disappearance. But sometimes in the deep desert, he still hears those phantom sounds, and he wonders if some mysteries are better left unsolved. The gang listens to Charles's story in respectful silence. They know he's not given to flights of fancy, that if Charles says something happened, it happened. The mystery of the missing stagecoach becomes part of their shared mythology, a reminder that the world is full of things that can't be explained. The legend of the Phantom Rider. Bill Williamson claims he doesn't believe in ghosts, but he tells this story anyway. usually after he's had a few drinks and the fire is burning low. It's a story from his army days, from a time he doesn't like to talk about but sometimes can't help remembering. His unit was stationed at a remote fort in Indian territory, he says. It was dangerous country, full of hostile tribes and desperate outlaws. Patrols went out regularly, but they didn't always come back. The desert was littered with the bones of soldiers who'd gotten lost or ambushed or simply disappeared. One night, Bill was on guard duty when he saw a rider approaching the fort. The figure was still distant. Something about it seemed wrong. The horse moved too smoothly, too quietly. The rider sat too still, never swaying with the horse's gait. As the figure drew closer, Bill could see it more clearly. The rider wore a cavalry uniform, but it was torn and faded. The horse was gaunt, its ribs showing through patchy hide, and the rider's face, when Bill finally saw it clearly, was a skull grinning beneath a cavalry hat. Bill called out a challenge, but the phantom rider didn't respond. It simply rode past the fort, heading into the desert, leaving no tracks in the sand. Bill watched until it disappeared into the darkness, then spent the rest of his watch wondering if he'd really seen it, or if the isolation and stress had finally gotten to him. The next morning, Bill reported what he'd seen to his commanding officer. The officer listened without comment, then told Bill something that chilled him to the bone. Every guard who'd served at that fort had seen the phantom rider. It appeared regularly, always riding the same path, always heading into the desert where so many soldiers had died. The officer's theory was that it was the ghost of a cavalry scout who'd been killed in an ambush years earlier. The scout had been trying to warn the fort of an impending attack when he was shot down. Now he rode eternally, still trying to deliver his message, still trying to save lives that were already lost. Bill never saw the phantom rider again, but he never forgot it either. When he tells this story, his voice drops to a whisper, and he glances over his shoulder as if expecting to see that grinning skull watching him from the darkness, the tale of the cursed gold mine. Micah Bell has many stories, most of them about his own cleverness and courage, but this one is different, darker, told with an uncharacteristic seriousness that makes the gang pay attention despite their usual skepticism about Micah's tales. There was a gold mine up in the mountains, Micah says, worked by a small crew of miners who'd struck it rich. The gold was pure and plentiful, more than they'd ever dreamed of finding. But the mine had a history, a dark past that the miners chose to ignore. The mine had been sacred to the local Indian tribe, a place where they buried their dead and communed with spirits. When the miners moved in, the tribe warned them to leave, told them the mountain was cursed, that disturbing the dead would bring terrible consequences. The miners laughed and kept digging. At first, everything went well. The gold flowed freely, and the miners grew rich. But then strange things began to happen. Tools would disappear overnight. Support beams would collapse for no reason. Men would hear voices calling from deep in the mine, voices speaking in a language they didn't understand. One by one, the miners began to die. Accidents, they called them at first. A cave-in here, a gas pocket there, a slip on a wet rock. But the deaths were too frequent, too convenient, too perfectly timed to be mere accidents. The mountain was fighting back, reclaiming what had been taken from it. Micah claims he was the last miner to leave the mountain alive. He'd seen enough death, heard enough voices, felt enough cold spots in the tunnels to know that some places are better left undisturbed. He took what gold he could carry and rode away, never looking back. The mine is still there, Micah says, still full of gold, still waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to try again. But the curse remains too, and the mountain remembers. Anyone who enters that mine does so at their own peril. When Micah finishes his story, the gang sits in thoughtful silence. They know Micah is capable of lying, of exaggerating, of making himself the hero of every tale. But there's something in his voice, something in his eyes, that suggests this story might be true, and if it is, it's a reminder that some treasures come with prices too high to pay. The story of the woman in white. Mary Beth Gaskell loves romantic stories, and this one is her favourite to tell. It's a ghost story, but it's also a love story, and Mary Beth tells it with all the passion of someone who believes in both ghosts and love. There was a woman who lived in a grand house on the outskirts of Rhodes, Mary Beth says. She was beautiful and wealthy, and engaged to be married to a man she loved more than life itself. They were to be wed in the spring, when the flowers bloomed and the world was new. But the man was called away to war before the wedding could take place. He promised to return, promised to marry her the moment he came home. She believed him. She waited for him, wearing her wedding dress every day, watching the road for his return. Months passed, then years. The war ended, but the man didn't come home. Word reached her that he'd been killed in battle, that his body lay in an unmarked grave somewhere far away. But she refused to believe it. She kept waiting, kept watching, kept wearing that white dress until it grew tattered and grey. She died still waiting, still believing he would return. And now, Mary Beth says, her ghost walks the grounds of that old house, still wearing her wedding dress, still watching the road. People who pass by at night sometimes see her, a pale figure in white standing at the gate waiting for a love that will never come. Some say if you speak to her, if you tell her that her love is dead and she should move on, she'll finally find peace. But no one has ever been brave enough to try, and so she waits, eternally faithful, eternally hopeful, a ghost bound by love to a world she should have left long ago. Mary Beth finishes her story with tears in her eyes, and the gang sits in sympathetic silence. It's a sad story, but there's something beautiful in it too. Something about the power of love to transcend even death. And around the campfire, in the company of friends, even sad stories have their place. The tale of the Braithwaite treasure. The Braithwaites are one of the oldest families in Lemoyne, and like all old families, they have their secrets. Karen Jones heard this story from a servant who used to work at Braithwaite Manor, and she tells it with the relish of someone sharing forbidden knowledge. The Braithwaites made their fortune before the war, in ways that weren't entirely legal. They were smugglers and slavers, pirates and profiteers. They accumulated wealth beyond imagining, and they hid it somewhere on their property, afraid that the government or their enemies would try to take it. When the war came, when the South fell, the Braithwaites lost almost everything. There, slaves were freed, their lands were confiscated, their fortune was taxed and seized. But the hidden treasure remained hidden, known only to the family patriarch, who died without revealing its location. Since then, every generation of Braithwaites has searched for the treasure. They've torn up floorboards and dug up gardens. They've consulted maps and followed clues. But the treasure has never been found. Some say it doesn't exist, that it's just a family legend. Others say it's real, but protected by something that doesn't want it found. The servant who told Karen this story claimed to have seen something strange in the manor late one night. A figure in old-fashioned clothes walking through walls carrying a lantern that cast no light. The servant believed it was the ghost of the old patriarch, still guarding his treasure, still keeping it safe from anyone who might try to claim it. Karen doesn't know if the treasure is real or not, but she knows the Braithwaites believe in it, and that belief has shaped their family for generations. They're obsessed with the past, with what they've lost, with what they might still find, and that obsession has made them dangerous, willing to do anything to reclaim their former glory. The story of Sean's lucky escape. Sean Maguire is full of stories about his own adventures, most of them exaggerated beyond recognition. But this one, the gang agrees, is probably true, because Sean still has the scar to prove it. It happened in Ireland, before Sean came to America, when he was running with a different gang in a different country. They were robbing a wealthy landlord, a man who'd made his fortune squeezing rent from starving tenants. Sean was supposed to be the lookout, but he got bored and decided to explore the house instead. He found the landlord's study, filled with books and papers and a safe that practically begged to be opened. Sean was working on the lock when the landlord himself walked in, armed with a shotgun and a very bad temper. The landlord fired, and Sean felt the pellets tear through his side. He should have died right there, bleeding out on the floor of a rich man's study. But Sean was lucky, or blessed, or just too stubborn to die. He grabbed a letter opener from the desk and threw it at the landlord, catching him in the throat. The landlord went down and Sean stumbled out of the house, leaving a trail of blood behind him. His gang found him half a mile away, collapsed in a ditch, barely breathing. They patched him up as best they could and got him on a ship to America before the authorities could catch up. Sean shows off his scar when he tells this story, a puckered mess of tissue on his left side where the shotgun pellets went in. He's proud of it, proud of surviving, proud of killing the man who tried to kill him. It's a reminder, he says, that Sean Maguire is not so easy to get rid of. The gang laughs at Sean's bravado, but they also respect it. They've all had close calls, all survived things that should have killed them. Sean's story is just one more thread in the tapestry of near misses and lucky breaks that make up the outlaw life, the legend of the night folk. Lenny Summers heard this story from some locals in the swamps of Lemoyne, and it's one that makes everyone around the fire a little nervous. The night folk are real, the locals say, and they're not something you want to meet after dark. They live deep in the swamps, in places where no sane person would go. They don't speak, don't reason, don't seem to be entirely human anymore. Some say they're the descendants of people who fled into the swamps generations ago and never came out. Others say they're something older, something that was here before people came, something that resents the intrusion. The night folk hunt in packs, moving silently through the darkness, communicating in clicks and whistles that sound almost like bird calls. They carry crude weapons, machetes and clubs, and they attack without warning, without mercy, without any apparent motive except the joy of killing. Lenny says he's seen them himself, or at least seen signs of them. Bodies hanging from trees, stripped of valuables and left to rot. Camps destroyed, their occupants vanished without a trace. Strange symbols carved into tree bark, warnings or territorial markers or something else entirely. The locals have learned to avoid the deep swamps after dark. They stay on the roads, keep their fires burning bright, and never ever investigate strange sounds in the night. The night folk are out there, waiting, watching, and anyone foolish enough to enter their territory might never come out again. When Lenny finishes his story, The gang looks toward the swamps with new wariness. They've faced many dangers in their outlaw lives, but there's something particularly unsettling about an enemy that doesn't think like a human, doesn't want anything you can give them, just wants to kill. The story of Pearson's Navy days. Simon Pearson doesn't talk much about his time in the Navy, but when he does, the stories are always entertaining. This one is about the time his ship was caught in a storm so fierce that even the captain thought they were going to die. It happened somewhere in the Pacific, Pearson says, on a voyage that was supposed to be routine. The weather turned without warning, the sky going from blue to black in a matter of minutes. The waves rose higher than the masts, and the wind screamed like something alive and angry. The ship was tossed like a toy, thrown from wave to wave, taking on water faster than the pumps could handle. Men were swept overboard, their screams lost in the roar of the storm. The captain ordered everyone below, but Pearson stayed on deck, convinced that if he was going to die, he wanted to see it coming. He saw something in that storm, something he's never been able to explain. A light in the water, deep below the surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. It seemed to be guiding them, leading them through the worst of the waves, showing them a path through the chaos. Pearson followed that light with his eyes, and somehow, impossibly, the ship followed too. When the storm finally passed, when the sun came out and the sea calmed, Pearson looked for the light again, but it was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. The captain called it a miracle, said God himself had guided them to safety. But Pearson isn't so sure. He's seen a lot of strange things in his life, and he's learned that not everything can be explained by God or science. The gang listens to Pearson's story with interest. They're used to thinking of him as just the cook, the man who makes their stew and complains about supplies. But Pearson has lived a life before this one, has seen things they can only imagine. His story is a reminder that everyone around the fire has depths they don't always show. The tale of the Blackwater Massacre. This isn't a story anyone likes to tell, but it hangs over the gang like a shadow, and sometimes it needs to be acknowledged. The Blackwater job was supposed to be their biggest score, the one that would set them up for life. Instead, it was a disaster that cost them everything. Dutch planned it for months, gathering information, scouting locations, preparing for every contingency. The target was a ferry carrying a fortune in bonds and cash, enough money to buy their freedom and start new lives somewhere far away. It should have been simple, it should have been clean. But something went wrong. No one talks about exactly what happened, but the job turned into a bloodbath. Innocent people died, gang members died. The law came down on them harder than ever before, and they've been running ever since. The money from Blackwater is still out there somewhere, hidden by Dutch in a location only he knows. He promises they'll go back for it someday, when the heat dies down, when it's safe. But the gang wonders if it will ever be safe, if the shadow of Blackwater will ever stop following them. When this story comes up around the fire, the mood grows somber. They've lost friends because of Blackwater. They've lost their home, their security, their sense of invincibility. The job that was supposed to save them might have doomed them instead. And no one knows how to fix it. The story of Abigail's past. Abigail Roberts doesn't talk about her life before the gang, but sometimes, late at night, she'll share pieces of it with those she trusts. Her story is one of survival, of doing what she had to do to stay alive in a world that offered her no other options. She was young when she came to the gang, barely more than a girl, already hardened by years of poverty and abuse. She'd worked in saloons and worse places, selling the only thing she had to sell. She's not proud of it, but she's not ashamed either. She did what she had to do. Dutch took her in, gave her a place in the gang, treated her like a person instead of a commodity. For the first time in her life, she had a family, people who cared about her, a home she could call her own. She fell in love with John, had a son with him, built a life she never thought she'd have. But the past doesn't disappear just because you want it to. Abigail still carries the scars of her early years, the wariness, the distrust, the fear that everything she's built could be taken away in an instant. She loves John and Jack more than anything, but she also knows how fragile happiness can be. When Abigail shares her story, the women of the gang gather around her, offering comfort and understanding. They've all had hard lives, all made difficult choices. Abigail's story is their story too, a reminder that survival sometimes requires sacrifices that leave marks on the soul. The legend of the strange man. This is a story that's been passed around campfires for years, told by travelers and outlaws and anyone who spent time in the wild places of the world. The strange man appears without warning, knows things he shouldn't know, and leaves behind more questions than answers. He's been seen all over the frontier, always dressed the same way, always speaking in riddles, always seeming to know exactly what you're thinking. Some say he's the devil, come to tempt the wicked. Others say he's an angel testing the righteous. Most just say he's strange and leave it at that. The stories about him are always unsettling. He appears to people at crossroads, at moments of decision, when they're about to do something that will change their lives forever. He asks questions that cut to the heart of who they are. He offers bargains that seem too good to be true, and then he vanishes, leaving behind only the memory of his knowing smile. No one knows what the strange man wants, or why he appears to some people and not others. But everyone who's met him agrees on one thing: he's not entirely human. There's something in his eyes, something ancient and patient, that suggests he's been around for a very long time and will be around for a very long time more. The gang has heard stories about the strange man, but none of them have met him personally. They're not sure if that's good luck or bad. Meeting the strange man seems to change people, to set them on paths they might not have chosen otherwise. And in the outlaw life, the paths you choose can lead to glory or to the grave. The story of the first campfire. Dutch likes to tell this story on special occasions, when the gang needs to remember why they're together, what they're fighting for. It's the story of how the Van der Linde gang began, of the first night Dutch and Hosea spent around a fire dreaming of the future. They were young then, Dutch says, young and foolish and full of hope. They'd just pulled off their first job together, a small con that netted them enough money to eat for a week. They made camp in the wilderness, built a fire, and talked about what they wanted from life. Dutch wanted freedom. He'd grown up poor, oppressed by a system that valued money over people, that crushed anyone who didn't fit its mold. He wanted to live outside that system, to prove that a man could be free if he was brave enough to take his freedom. Hosea wanted something simpler. He wanted security, a place to belong, people he could trust. He'd been alone for too long, running cons by himself, never staying in one place long enough to make connections. He wanted a family, even if it was a family of outlaws. That night, around that first campfire, they made a pact. They would build something together, a gang that was also a family, a group of people who looked out for each other, who shared everything, who lived free. They would take from the rich and give to the poor. They would be outlaws, but they would be good outlaws, outlaws with a code. Over the years, the gang grew. Arthur joined, then John, then all the others. The dream evolved, became more complicated, faced challenges that Dutch and Hosea never anticipated. But the core of it remained the same: freedom, family, loyalty. The values they established around that first campfire still guide them today. When Dutch finishes this story, the gang sits in reflective silence. They've been through a lot together, faced dangers and losses that would have broken lesser groups, but they're still here, still together, still fighting for the dream that started around a fire so many years ago. The tale of the Lemoyne Raiders. The Lemoyne Raiders are a constant threat in this part of the country, a group of Confederate veterans who never accepted that the war was over. They terrorize the local population, attack anyone they see as an enemy, and dream of a South that will rise again. Charles has had run-ins with them before, and he tells the gang what he knows. The Raiders are organized, well-armed, and fanatically devoted to their cause. Their leader is a former Confederate officer who lost everything in the war and has spent the years since trying to rebuild what was destroyed. They operate out of hidden camps in the swamps and forests, striking without warning and disappearing before the law can respond. They've killed dozens of people, maybe hundreds, and they show no signs of stopping. The local authorities are either unable or unwilling to deal with them. The gang has clashed with the Raiders several times, and each encounter has been violent. The Raiders see the Van der Linde gang as outsiders, as enemies of the Southern way of life. The gang sees the Raiders as bullies and murderers, no better than the corrupt lawmen and wealthy landowners they claim to oppose. Charles warns the gang to be careful in Lemoyne. The Raiders are everywhere, watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. They're not like other enemies the gang has faced. They're true believers, willing to die for their cause, and that makes them unpredictable and dangerous. The story of Kieran's capture. Kieran Duffy came to the gang as a prisoner, captured during a raid on the O'Driscoll camp. He was terrified, convinced they were going to kill him, and he talked to save his life. Now he's part of the gang, sort of, though some members still don't trust him. Kieran tells the story of his capture from his own perspective, and it's a tale of fear and desperation. He'd been with the O'Driscolls for only a few months, never really fitting in, always on the edges of the group. When the Van der Linde gang attacked, he tried to run, but Arthur caught him. He thought he was going to die. The Van der Linde gang had a reputation for being ruthless, for killing anyone who crossed them. Kieran begged for his life, offered to tell them everything he knew about the O'Driscolls, promised to do anything they wanted if they just let him live. They kept him tied up for days, questioning him, threatening him, making him prove his loyalty. It was the worst experience of his life, worse even than the things he'd seen with the O'Driscolls. But eventually they let him go, gave him a place in the camp, started treating him almost like one of their own. Kieran is grateful to the gang, even if he's still scared of them. He knows he's on probation, that one wrong move could mean his death. But he also knows that the Van der Linde gang is better than the O'Driscolls, that Dutch's vision of freedom and family is something worth believing in. He just hopes he lives long enough to truly become part of it. The legend of the Devil's Cave. There's a cave in the mountains that the locals call the Devil's Cave, and they have good reason for the name. Strange things happen there, things that can't be explained by science or reason. Javier heard about it from a prospector who'd gone in looking for gold and come out looking for a priest. The cave goes deep into the mountain, the prospector said, deeper than any natural cave should go. The walls are covered with paintings, ancient images of creatures that don't exist, rituals that don't make sense, symbols that hurt to look at. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets. The prospector made it about a mile in before he started hearing voices. They whispered in languages he didn't understand, seemed to come from the walls themselves. He tried to ignore them, kept pushing forward, convinced that the gold was just a little further in. Then he saw the light, a red glow, pulsing from somewhere deep in the cave, casting shadows that moved on their own. The prospector felt something watching him, something old and hungry and patient. He turned and ran, didn't stop running until he was back in the sunlight, and he never went back. Javier doesn't know if the story's true, but he's heard similar tales from other people, all describing the same cave, the same paintings, the same red light. Whatever's in that cave, it's been there for a long time, and it doesn't want to be disturbed. The gang files this story away with all the other strange tales they've heard. The frontier is full of mysteries, places where the normal rules don't apply. The Devil's Cave is just one more reminder that the world is bigger and stranger than anyone can imagine. The story of Miss Grimshaw's youth. Susan Grimshaw is the backbone of the camp, the one who keeps everything running, who makes sure everyone does their share. She's tough and demanding and doesn't suffer fools. But she wasn't always this way. Once she was young and wild and in love. She tells this story rarely, only when the mood is right and the fire is warm. She was beautiful in her youth, she says, with hair like fire and a temper to match. She ran with a gang of her own, a group of women who robbed and conned their way across the frontier. They were fearless, unstoppable, legends in their own time. She met Dutch when she was at the height of her power, when she thought she didn't need anyone. He was charming and handsome and full of ideas that matched her own. They fell in love, passionate and intense, the kind of love that burns bright and hot. For a while they were partners in every sense. They planned jobs together, fought together, dreamed together. Susan thought it would last forever, thought she'd found the one person who truly understood her. But love doesn't always last, and people change. They drifted apart, slowly at first, then more quickly. Dutch's attention wandered to other women, other dreams. Susan's fire cooled into something harder, more practical. They stopped being lovers and became something else, something more complicated. Partners, friends, family, but not what they'd been before. Susan doesn't regret her time with Dutch, but she doesn't romanticize it either. Love is wonderful while it lasts, she says, but it doesn't always last, and you have to be prepared for that. She's found other things to care about now. The gang, the camp, the people who depend on her. It's not the same as love, but it's enough. When Susan finishes her story, the gang sees her differently. She's not just the stern taskmaster who yells at them for not doing their chores. She's a woman with a past, with loves and losses, with dreams that didn't quite come true. And that makes her more human, more relatable, more worthy of respect. The tale of the Valentine Bank. The Valentine Bank job is one of the gang's proudest achievements. A perfectly executed heist that netted them enough money to live comfortably for months. Karen was instrumental in the planning, and she loves to tell the story of how it all came together. It started with reconnaissance. Karen spent weeks in Valentine posing as a respectable woman looking to open an account. She charmed the bank manager, learned the layout of the building, figured out when the vault was fullest and the guards were fewest. She was the perfect spy, invisible in plain sight. The job itself was almost anticlimactic. They hit the bank at midday when most of the town was at lunch. Arthur and Bill handled the guards while Karen and Lenny emptied the vault. They were in and out in less than 10 minutes, riding away before anyone knew what had happened. The getaway was the tricky part. The law was on their trail within the hour, and they had to ride hard and fast to stay ahead. There were close calls, moments when it seemed like they'd be caught, but they made it back to camp with the money and their lives intact. Karen is proud of her role in the Valentine job, proud of the skills she brought to the table. She's not just a pretty face or a distraction. She's a planner, a thinker, someone who can see the angles and figure out the best approach. The Valentine job proved that, and she won't let anyone forget it. The story of Strauss's past. Leopold Strauss is the gang's money man, the one who handles the loans and the ledgers. He's not popular, his methods are harsh and his manner is cold, but he's useful, and that counts for something. His past, though, is more complicated than most people know. He came from Europe, from a country that doesn't exist anymore, swallowed up by empires and wars. He was educated, cultured, destined for a respectable life in banking or law. But circumstances intervened, as they always do, and he found himself on a ship to America with nothing but the clothes on his back. He tried to make an honest living at first, working as a clerk, as a bookkeeper, as anything that would pay. But honest work didn't pay enough, and Strauss had expensive tastes. He drifted into less legitimate enterprises, using his financial skills to help criminals manage their money. He met Dutch through a mutual acquaintance, a fence who thought they might work well together. Dutch needed someone to handle the gang's finances, and Strauss needed a steady income. It was a business arrangement that became something more, a partnership that's lasted for years. Strauss doesn't talk about his past often, doesn't share the details of how he ended up here. But sometimes, late at night, he'll mention the country he left behind, the life he might have had, the choices that led him to this campfire in the American wilderness. And for a moment he seems almost human. The legend of the white bison. The white bison is sacred to many Indian tribes, a symbol of hope and renewal, a sign that the spirits are watching over the land. Charles has heard stories about it his whole life, passed down from his mother's people, and he shares them with the gang on quiet nights. The white bison appears only rarely, once in a generation or less. When it does appear, it's a sign that great changes are coming, that the world is about to shift in ways no one can predict. Some say seeing the white bison brings good luck. Others say it brings responsibility, a call to action that can't be ignored. Charles's mother saw the white bison once, when she was a young woman. She was alone in the wilderness, mourning the loss of her family to disease and violence. The bison appeared to her at dawn, standing in a meadow filled with wildflowers, its white coat glowing in the early light. She approached it slowly, reverently, and it didn't run. It stood there, watching her with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the ages. She felt something pass between them, a connection that transcended words, a message that she carried with her for the rest of her life. The message, as she understood it, was simple: survive. No matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, survive. The world needs people who remember the old ways, who carry the stories and the traditions. As long as they survive, hope survives too. Charles has never seen the white bison himself, but he believes it's out there somewhere, waiting for the right moment to appear. And when it does, he hopes he'll be ready to receive its message, whatever that message might be. The story of Reverend Swanson's fall. Orville Swanson was a man of God once, a respected minister with a congregation that loved him. Now he's a drunken and addict, barely holding himself together, a shadow of the man he used to be. His fall from grace is a cautionary tale, and he tells it with the bitter honesty of someone who's lost everything. It started with doubt, he says. He'd been preaching for years, telling people that God loved them, that everything happened for a reason, that faith would see them through. But he started to wonder if any of it was true. He saw good people suffer and bad people prosper. He saw prayers go unanswered and miracles fail to materialize. The doubt ate at him, made it harder and harder to stand in front of his congregation and speak words he wasn't sure he believed. He started drinking to quiet the doubt, to numb the guilt of lying to people who trusted him. The drinking led to other things, worse things, until he couldn't hide his problems anymore. His congregation turned on him, called him a hypocrite and a fraud. His wife left him, took their children, said she couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore. He lost his church, his home, his reputation, everything he'd built over a lifetime of service. He drifted for years, living on the streets, begging for money to feed his addictions. He would have died in a gutter if Dutch hadn't found him, hadn't seen something worth saving in the broken man he'd become. Dutch gave him a place in the gang, a purpose, a reason to keep going. Swanson is still struggling, still fighting his demons every day, but he's alive, and sometimes that's enough. His story is a reminder that anyone can fall, that the line between respectability and ruin is thinner than most people think, and it's a reminder that redemption is possible, even for those who've fallen the furthest. The Tale of the Moonshine Runners. Before Prohibition made it famous, moonshine was already a way of life in the hills and hollows of Appalachia. The gang has encountered moonshiners in their travels, and the stories they tell are full of danger and ingenuity. The moonshiners operate in secret, hiding their stills in caves and hollows where the revenue agents can't find them. They work at night by the light of the moon, hence the name. The whiskey they produce is rough and strong, nothing like the refined spirits sold in city saloons, but it's cheap and plentiful and gets the job done. The revenue agents are always hunting them, trying to shut down their operations and collect the taxes they're owed. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, with the moonshiners always one step ahead. They know the land better than any outsider, know the hidden paths and secret caves, know how to disappear when trouble comes. Some moonshiners have become legends in their own right, folk heroes who thumb their noses at the government and provide for their communities. They're seen as rebels, as freedom fighters, as men and women who refuse to let the authorities tell them what they can and can't do. The gang respects the moonshiners, sees them as kindred spirits. They're outlaws too in their own way, living outside the law and making their own rules. And the whiskey they produce, while rough, is always welcome around the campfire on cold nights. The story of the Wapiti Reservation. The Wapiti Indian Reservation is a sad place, a reminder of everything that's been taken from the native peoples of this land. Charles has visited it, has seen the poverty and despair, has talked to the people who live there. Their stories haunt him. The Wapiti were once a proud and powerful tribe, masters of the plains, following the buffalo herds across a land that seemed to have no end. But the white men came, with their guns and their diseases and their insatiable hunger for land. The buffalo were slaughtered, the land was taken, and the Wapiti were forced onto a reservation that was a fraction of their former territory. Now they live in poverty, dependent on government handouts that never seem to arrive, forbidden from practicing their traditions, watched over by agents who treat them like children. The young people are sent to schools where they're taught to forget their language and their culture, to become white in everything but skin colour. Charles sees himself in the Wapiti, sees the fate that might have been his if circumstances had been different. His mother was Indian, and he carries her blood and her stories, but he was raised in the white world, never fully belonging to either culture, always caught between two worlds that don't understand each other. He tells the gang about the Wapiti not to make them feel guilty, but to make them understand. The frontier they romanticize, the freedom they celebrate, came at a cost. Someone paid for it, and the Wapiti are still paying. It's a truth that's easy to forget, but Charles won't let them forget it. The legend of the giant. There are stories of a giant living in the mountains, a man so large that he makes normal people look like children. Some say he's 8 feet tall, others say 10. Some say he's gentle, others say he's dangerous. No one knows for sure because no one who's seen him up close has lived to tell the tale. Bill claims to have seen the giant once from a distance. He was hunting in the mountains, tracking a deer, when he saw a figure moving through the trees. At first he thought it was a bear, but then it stood up, and Bill realized it was a man, the biggest man he'd ever seen. The giant didn't see Bill, or if he did, he didn't care. He just walked through the forest, each step covering more ground than Bill could cover in 3. He disappeared into the trees, and Bill didn't follow. Some things, he decided, are better left alone. The gang speculates about the giant, wondering who he is and where he came from. Maybe he's a hermit, someone who retreated to the mountains to escape the world. Maybe he's something else, something not entirely human. The frontier is full of mysteries, and the giant is just one more. The story of the perfect score. Every outlaw dreams of the perfect score, the one job that will set them up for life, that will let them retire in comfort and never worry about money again. Dutch has been chasing that dream for years, and he tells the gang about the jobs that came close. There was a train in Colorado carrying payroll for the mining companies. Dutch planned the job for months, had every detail worked out. But the train was rerouted at the last minute, and they hit an empty car instead of a fortune. There was a bank in Kansas City, supposedly holding the savings of a dozen wealthy families. They got inside, got the vault open, found nothing but dust and cobwebs. The families had moved their money the week before, tipped off by someone Dutch never identified. There was a stagecoach in New Mexico carrying a shipment of gold from a mine to a mint. They stopped the coach, killed the guards, opened the strongbox. The gold was fake, lead bars painted yellow, a decoy to draw attention away from the real shipment travelling a different route. Every time Dutch thought he'd found the perfect score, something went wrong. Bad luck, bad timing, bad information. The dream stayed just out of reach, tantalising and frustrating in equal measure. But Dutch hasn't given up. He still believes the perfect score is out there, waiting for them. One big job, one last heist, and they'll be free forever. The gang wants to believe him, wants to share his optimism, but some of them are starting to wonder if the perfect score is just another dream that will never come true. The tale of the singing river. There's a river in the Grizzlies that the locals call the Singing River because on certain nights you can hear music coming from its waters. No one knows where the music comes from, but everyone who's heard it agrees it's the most beautiful sound they've ever experienced. Hosea heard it once, years ago, when he was travelling alone through the mountains. He made camp by the river, and as the sun set, the music began. It was soft at first, barely audible over the rush of the water, but it grew louder as the night deepened. The music was like nothing Hosea had ever heard. It was sad and beautiful, haunting and hopeful all at once. It seemed to speak directly to his soul, to touch something deep inside him that he didn't know existed. He sat by the river all night, listening, not wanting it to end. When dawn came, the music faded, and Hosea was left with only the memory of it. He's tried to find that river again, tried to hear that music one more time, but he's never been able to. It's as if the river only sings for those who need to hear it, and Hosea's need has passed. He tells this story with a wistfulness that's unusual for him. Hosea is practical, grounded, not given to flights of fancy. But the singing river touched something in him, showed him that there's more to the world than what we can see and touch, and that knowledge has stayed with him, a quiet comfort in difficult times, the story of the lost patrol. During the Indian Wars, a cavalry patrol rode into the wilderness and never came back. Dozens of soldiers, fully armed and supplied, vanished without a trace. The army sent search parties, but they found nothing. The lost patrol became a legend, a mystery that's never been solved. Bill heard this story during his army days, and it stuck with him ever since. The patrol was commanded by a young lieutenant, ambitious and eager to make a name for himself. He led his men into territory that more experienced officers avoided, convinced that he could succeed where others had failed. The last anyone saw of them, they were riding into a canyon that the local Indians called the place of no return. The Indians warned the lieutenant not to go, told him that evil spirits lived in that canyon, that anyone who entered would never leave. The lieutenant laughed and rode in anyway. Search parties found the entrance to the canyon, but none of them went inside. The Indians' warnings had spread, and even the bravest soldiers were reluctant to test them. The army eventually declared the patrol lost, presumed dead, and closed the case. But rumours persist. Travellers in the area sometimes report seeing soldiers in old-fashioned uniforms riding through the wilderness as if on patrol. They don't respond to calls, don't seem to notice the living at all. They just ride endlessly, searching for a way out of a canyon they entered decades ago. Bill doesn't know if the stories are true, but he believes them. He's seen enough strange things in his life to know that the world doesn't always follow the rules we expect. The Lost Patrol is out there somewhere, still riding, still searching, still hoping to find their way home. The legend of the healing springs. Deep in the wilderness, there's a hot spring that's said to have miraculous healing powers. People have travelled from all over the country to bathe in its waters, hoping to cure diseases that doctors can't treat, to heal injuries that should have been fatal. Tilly heard about the springs from a woman she met in St. Denis, a woman who claimed to have been cured of consumption after bathing in the waters. The woman had been given months to live, had made peace with her death, had said goodbye to everyone she loved. Then someone told her about the springs. She made the journey, difficult as it was in her weakened state. She found the springs hidden in a valley, steam rising from waters that glowed with an otherworldly light. She bathed in them, felt the heat seep into her bones, felt something change inside her. When she emerged, she was healed. The consumption was gone, her lungs clear, her strength returning. The doctors couldn't explain it, called it a miracle, a spontaneous remission. But the woman knew the truth. The springs had saved her. Tilly doesn't know if the story is true, but she wants to believe it. The world is hard, and people get sick, and sometimes there's nothing anyone can do. The idea that there's a place where the impossible becomes possible, where the dying can be healed, is comforting. Even if it's just a legend, it's a legend worth believing in. The story of the hermit of the hills. There's a hermit living in the hills north of Strawberry, a man who's been there for as long as anyone can remember. He doesn't talk to visitors, doesn't come into town, doesn't seem to need anything from the outside world. He just lives alone in a cabin he built himself, surviving on what the land provides. Arthur encountered him once during a hunting trip. The hermit was sitting on his porch watching the sunset, and he didn't seem surprised to see Arthur. He just nodded, as if visitors were a normal occurrence, and went back to watching the sky. Arthur tried to talk to him, asked him questions about his life, about why he'd chosen to live alone. The hermit didn't answer, just smiled and shook his head. After a while, Arthur gave up and left, feeling like he'd intruded on something private. Later, Arthur learned more about the hermit from the people in Strawberry. He'd been a professor once, they said, a brilliant man who taught at a university back east. But something happened, something that broke him, and he retreated to the wilderness to escape. Some say he lost his family to disease. Others say he was involved in a scandal that ruined his career. No one knows for sure, and the hermit isn't talking. He just lives his quiet life, alone with his thoughts, waiting for something that only he understands. Arthur thinks about the hermit sometimes, wonders what it would be like to leave everything behind and start over. The outlaw life is hard, full of danger and uncertainty. The hermit's life seems peaceful by comparison, even if it's lonely. Maybe there's something to be said for solitude, the tale of the cursed family. The Braithwaites and the Greys have been feuding for generations, but there's another family in Lemoyne whose story is even darker. The Compson family was once one of the wealthiest in the region, but they've fallen on hard times, and some say they're cursed. The curse began, according to legend, when the family patriarch made a deal with the devil. He wanted wealth and power, and he was willing to pay any price to get them. The devil obliged, giving him everything he asked for, but the price was his family's soul. For a generation, the Compsons prospered. They built a grand mansion, acquired vast lands, wielded influence over the entire region. But then the curse began to take effect. Children died young, marriages ended in tragedy, fortunes were lost to bad investments and worse luck. Now the Compsons are a shadow of what they once were. The mansion is crumbling, the lands have been sold off, and the few remaining family members live in poverty and madness. They say the last Compson wanders the ruins of his family home, talking to ghosts that only he can see, waiting for the devil to come and collect what's owed. The gang has seen the Compson mansion, a decaying monument to pride and folly. It's a reminder that wealth and power don't last forever, that the deals we make have consequences we can't foresee, and it's a warning about the dangers of wanting too much, of being willing to sacrifice everything for success. The story of the Underground Railroad. Before the war, when slavery was still legal, there was a network of safe houses and secret routes that helped escaped slaves reach freedom in the North. They called it the Underground Railroad, and it saved thousands of lives. Tilly's grandmother was one of those lives. She escaped from a plantation in Georgia, traveling by night, hiding by day, following the North Star toward freedom. She was helped by strangers who risked their own lives to shelter her, who believed that no human being should be property. The journey took months through swamps and forests, across rivers and mountains. There were close calls, moments when she thought she'd be caught and sent back to the plantation. But she kept going, kept believing that freedom was worth any risk. She made it to Canada, where slavery was illegal, where she could live as a free woman. She built a new life there, married, had children, told them stories about the Underground Railroad and the brave people who'd helped her escape. Tilly carries those stories with her, a connection to a past that's both painful and inspiring. The Underground Railroad is a reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that courage and compassion can change the world. And it's a reminder that freedom is never free, that it has to be fought for and defended. The legend of the vampire of Saint Denis. Saint Denis is a city of secrets, and one of its darkest secrets is the vampire who's said to live in its shadows. The stories have been circulating for years, whispered in saloons and back alleys, dismissed by the authorities but believed by those who've seen too much to doubt. The vampire preys on the city's most vulnerable, the poor, the homeless, the people no one will miss. Bodies are found in alleys, drained of blood, with puncture wounds on their necks. The police call it the work of a madman, but the people of St. Denis know better. Mary Beth has collected stories about the vampire, fascinated by the mystery despite her fear. Some say he's a European nobleman who came to America to escape persecution. Others say he's been in St. Denis since the city was founded, feeding on its citizens for generations. The vampire is said to live in an abandoned building in the old part of the city, sleeping during the day, hunting at night. Some brave souls have tried to find him, to destroy him, but none have succeeded. The vampire is cunning, ancient, and very, very dangerous. Mary Beth doesn't know if the vampire is real, but she's not eager to find out. St. Denis is dangerous enough without adding supernatural predators to the mix. She'll stick to the daylight, thank you very much, and leave the vampire hunting to someone braver than her. The story of the first snow. There's something magical about the first snow of winter, the way it transforms the world into something clean and new. The gang has experienced many first snows together, and each one brings back memories of the ones that came before. Dutch remembers a first snow in the mountains, years ago, when the gang was smaller and the future seemed brighter. They were camped in a high valley, surrounded by peaks that touched the sky. When the snow began to fall, they gathered around the fire and watched it cover the world in white. That night, Dutch gave one of his speeches, the kind that made everyone believe in the dream. He talked about freedom and family, about building something that would last, about leaving the world better than they found it. The snow fell around them like a blessing, and for a moment, everything seemed possible. The gang has been through a lot since that night. They've lost friends, made enemies, faced challenges that would have broken lesser groups. But when the first snow falls, they remember that night in the mountains, remember the hope they felt, remember why they're still fighting. The first snow is a reminder that the world can still surprise them, can still offer moments of beauty and wonder. No matter how hard things get, no matter how dark the future seems, there's always the possibility of something new, something clean, something that covers the past and offers a fresh start. The tale of the medicine woman. In the hills of Amberino there lives a woman who's said to have the power to heal any illness, cure any wound, even bring the dead back to life. People travel from all over to seek her help, and those who find her are never the same. Charles met her once during his wandering years. He was sick, fevered, delirious from an infected wound that should have killed him. He stumbled into her camp more dead than alive, and she took him in without question. She treated him with herbs and poultices, with chants and rituals that seemed to come from another world. Charles drifted in and out of consciousness, seeing visions that he couldn't explain, feeling presences that he couldn't identify. When he finally woke, clear-headed and healed, the medicine woman was gone. He never found her again, though he looked. It was as if she'd appeared just when he needed her and vanished when her work was done. Charles doesn't know if she was human or spirit, real or imagined, but he knows she saved his life and he's grateful. The gang listens to Charles's story with respect. They know he's not one for tall tales, that if he says something happened, it happened. The medicine woman is out there somewhere, helping those who need her, appearing when she's needed most. And that's a comforting thought in a world full of danger. The story of the train robbery that went right. Not every job ends in disaster. Sometimes, rarely, everything goes according to plan. The gang loves to remember those jobs, to relive the moments when they were unstoppable, when the world bent to their will. The train robbery in question happened in the Heartlands, on a clear autumn day when the leaves were turning gold. They'd been planning it for weeks, scouting the route, timing the schedules, preparing for every contingency. When the day came, they were ready. Arthur stopped the train with a well-placed shot to the engine. Bill and Javier handled the guards while Dutch and Hosea worked on the passengers. Karen and Tilly kept watch, ready to signal if trouble approached. Everyone knew their role and everyone played it perfectly. The safe was full, more money than they'd expected, enough to keep them comfortable for months. They loaded it onto horses and rode away before the law even knew what had happened. No one was killed, no one was caught, no one made a mistake. That night, around the campfire, they celebrated like they hadn't celebrated in years. There was whiskey and music and laughter, a sense of triumph that made all the hard times worth it. For one night, they were kings of the world, masters of their own destiny. The gang holds on to that memory, pulls it out when things get hard. They've had their share of failures, their share of disasters, but they've also had their triumphs, their moments of glory, and as long as they remember those moments, they can believe that more are coming. The legend of the crying woman. In the swamps of Lemoyne, there's a spirit known as the crying woman. She appears at night near bodies of water, weeping for children she lost long ago. Those who hear her cries are said to be marked for tragedy. The legend comes from Mexico originally, Javier says, where she's known as La Llorona. But she's travelled north, following the rivers and streams, spreading her sorrow wherever she goes. Javier's grandmother used to tell him stories about her, warnings to stay away from the water after dark. The crying woman was once a living woman, beautiful and proud, who drowned her children in a fit of jealous rage. When she realized what she'd done, she threw herself into the water after them, but it was too late. Now she wanders the waterways searching for her children, crying tears that never stop. If you hear her crying, Javier warns, don't go to her. Don't try to help her. Don't try to comfort her. She'll mistake you for one of her children and drag you into the water with her. Many have died that way, lured by compassion into a watery grave. The gang has heard strange sounds in the swamps at night, sounds that might be wind or animals or something else entirely. They don't investigate. Some legends are better left untested, and the crying woman is one of them. The story of the photographer. There's a photographer who travels the frontier, capturing images of a world that's rapidly disappearing. He's documented outlaws and lawmen, Indians and settlers, the beautiful and the terrible. His photographs are windows into a past that's slipping away. Arthur met him once in Valentine, and they talked for hours about the changing world. The photographer was melancholy, aware that he was recording the end of an era. The frontier was closing, he said. The wild places were being tamed. Soon, there would be nothing left to photograph. He asked Arthur to pose for a picture, and Arthur agreed, though he felt foolish standing still while the photographer fiddled with his equipment. The result was a portrait that captured something Arthur didn't know was there. A weariness, a sadness, a sense of time running out. Arthur kept that photograph, looks at it sometimes when he's alone. It's a reminder of who he is, of what he's become, of the life he's lived. And it's a reminder that nothing lasts forever, that even outlaws grow old, that the world moves on whether we're ready or not. The photographer is still out there, still capturing images, still documenting the end of the frontier. Someday, his photographs will be all that's left of this world, and people will look at them and wonder what it was like to live in a time when anything seemed possible. The tale of the abandoned town. There's a town in the desert that was abandoned overnight, its residents vanishing without explanation. The buildings still stand, the belongings still sit where they were left, but there's no one there. It's as if the entire population simply walked away and never came back. Micah stumbled across it during one of his solo rides, and even he was unsettled by what he found. The town was perfectly preserved, frozen in time. Meals sat on tables, half-eaten, clothes hung on lines waiting to be collected. A newspaper lay open on a porch, its date from years ago. He searched the town for hours, looking for some explanation, some clue to what had happened. He found nothing. No bodies, no signs of violence, no indication of where the people had gone. It was as if they'd been plucked from existence, leaving everything behind. Micah left before nightfall, unwilling to spend the night in that empty place. He'd been back since, drawn by curiosity and the hope of finding something valuable. But the town remains empty, remains silent, remains a mystery that refuses to be solved. The gang speculates about what might have happened. Disease maybe, or Indians, or something stranger. But no explanation quite fits, and the abandoned town remains one of the frontier's many unsolved mysteries, the story of the loyal dog. Animals feature in many campfire stories, and this one is about a dog whose loyalty transcended death. It's a sad story, but also a beautiful one, and the gang listens with quiet attention. The dog belonged to a miner who worked a claim in the mountains. They were inseparable, the man and his dog, partners in the lonely work of extracting gold from the earth. When the miner died in a cave-in, the dog refused to leave his side. Rescuers found them days later, the miner's body and the dog lying beside it, weak from hunger but still alive. They tried to take the dog away, to care for it, but it wouldn't leave. It stayed by the grave they dug for the miner, waiting for a master who would never return. The dog died there, weeks later, still waiting. The locals buried it beside the miner, together in death as they'd been in life. And now, they say, you can sometimes see a ghostly dog wandering the mountains, still searching for its master, still loyal after all these years. The gang has dogs of their own, camp dogs that follow them from place to place. They're not as devoted as the miner's dog, perhaps, but they're loyal in their own way. And the story is a reminder that loyalty is a virtue, that the bonds we form matter, that love doesn't end just because life does. The legend of the golden gun. Every outlaw has heard of the golden gun, a weapon so beautiful and so deadly that it's become the stuff of legend. It's said to have been made by a master gunsmith for a Mexican general, plated in gold and inlaid with precious stones. The general was killed in a revolution, and the gun disappeared. Since then, it's passed through many hands, always bringing fortune and misfortune in equal measure. Those who possess it become famous, feared, unstoppable, but they also become targets, hunted by everyone who wants the gun for themselves. Dutch claims to have seen the golden gun once, in the possession of a gunfighter who was the fastest draw in the West. The gunfighter was arrogant, confident in his skill and his weapon. He challenged Dutch to a duel, certain of victory. Dutch declined. He's not a fool, and he knew he couldn't beat the fastest draw in the West, but he also knew that someone would, eventually. The golden gun attracts challengers like honey attracts flies. Sooner or later, someone faster would come along. He was right. The gunfighter was killed a month later, shot in the back by someone who didn't believe in fair fights. The golden gun disappeared again, passed to new hands, continued its journey through the underworld. Dutch doesn't want the golden gun. He's seen what it does to people, how it corrupts them, how it makes them believe they're invincible. He'd rather have a plain gun and a clear head than a golden gun and a target on his back. The story of the flood. Natural disasters are a constant threat on the frontier, and floods are among the worst. The gang has experienced several, and each one has left its mark on their collective memory. The worst was in the spring of '93, when the rivers rose higher than anyone had ever seen. The gang was camped in a valley thinking they were safe when the water came rushing down from the mountains. They barely had time to grab their horses and ride for high ground. They lost everything that couldn't be carried. Tents, supplies, personal belongings accumulated over years. They watched from a hilltop as the water swept through their camp, carrying away the life they'd built. It was devastating, a reminder of how quickly everything can be taken away. But they survived. They rebuilt. They found new supplies, made new camps, started over. The flood was a setback, not an ending, and the experience taught them to be more careful, to always have an escape route, to never assume they were safe. The gang tells this story to new members, a warning and a lesson. The frontier is beautiful, but it's also dangerous. Nature doesn't care about human plans or human lives. You have to be ready for anything, prepared to lose everything, willing to start over when disaster strikes. The tale of the star-crossed lovers. Love stories are popular around the campfire, and this one is a classic. Two people from feuding families who fall in love despite everything that should keep them apart. The families were the Braithwaites and the Greys, of course, whose feud has defined Lemoyne for generations. The lovers were a Braithwaite daughter and a grey son, young and foolish and convinced that their love could overcome centuries of hatred. They met in secret, in a grove of trees between their families' lands. They exchanged letters, made plans, dreamed of running away together to a place where no one knew their names. For a few brief months they were happy, but secrets don't stay secret forever, especially in a place where everyone watches everyone else. The families found out, and their reaction was swift and brutal. The grey son was sent away to relatives in another state. The Braithwaite daughter was locked in her room, forbidden to leave until she forgot her foolish infatuation. They never saw each other again. The grey son died in a bar fight years later, still carrying a lock of his lover's hair. The Braithwaite daughter married someone her family approved of, had children, lived a respectable life. But those who knew her said she was never truly happy, that something in her died when she lost her love. The story is a tragedy, but it's also a reminder of the power of love, of its ability to transcend boundaries and defy expectations. The lovers may have lost, but they loved truly, and that's more than many people can say. The legend of the Witch of the Woods. In the forests of Roanoke Ridge, there's said to be a witch who lives in a cabin made of bones. She's ancient, older than the trees themselves, and she has powers that defy explanation. Those who seek her out do so at their own risk. The witch can grant wishes, they say, but her prices are steep. She might ask for a year of your life, or a cherished memory, or something even more precious. And her wishes have a way of twisting, of giving you what you asked for in ways you never intended. A man once asked her for wealth, and she gave him a map to a gold mine. He became rich beyond his dreams, but the mine collapsed, killing his entire family. A woman asked for beauty, and the witch made her the most beautiful woman in the world. But her beauty attracted the wrong kind of attention, and she spent the rest of her life running from men who wanted to possess her. The gang has heard stories about the witch, but none of them have sought her out. They've learned that shortcuts usually lead to trouble, that getting what you want isn't always the same as getting what you need. The witch's cabin remains hidden in the woods, waiting for the next desperate soul to come seeking her help. The story of the last buffalo hunt. The buffalo once roamed the plains in numbers beyond counting, herds so vast that they darkened the horizon. But the white men came with their rifles and their railroads, and the buffalo began to disappear. Charles remembers the last great hunt, and he tells the story with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He was young then, travelling with a group of hunters who still followed the old ways. They tracked a herd for days, reading the signs, predicting the buffalo's movements. When they finally caught up, the herd was smaller than Charles had expected. A few hundred animals where once there would have been thousands. The hunt was successful. They killed enough buffalo to feed the tribe for months, used every part of the animal as their ancestors had taught them. But Charles could see the end coming. The herds were shrinking, the hunting grounds were being fenced off, the old ways were dying. That was the last great hunt Charles participated in. Since then, the buffalo have become even rarer, protected by laws that came too late to save them. Charles has seen buffalo in captivity, sad creatures behind fences, shadows of what they once were. It breaks his heart every time. The story is a lament for a world that's passing away, for a way of life that's being destroyed. Charles doesn't blame anyone in particular. The forces at work are too big for blame. But he mourns what's been lost, and he hopes that someday, somehow, the buffalo will return. The tale of the mysterious stranger. Strangers pass through the frontier all the time, but some are stranger than others. This story is about a man who appeared in camp one night, shared a meal with the gang, and disappeared before dawn, leaving behind more questions than answers. He was well dressed, articulate, clearly educated. He said he was a traveller, exploring the frontier, writing a book about the people he met. He asked questions about the gang's life, their hopes, their fears, their dreams. He listened more than he talked, and when he did talk, his words were carefully chosen. Dutch was suspicious of him, as Dutch is suspicious of everyone. But the stranger seemed harmless, even helpful. He shared news from the outside world, told stories of places the gang had never been, offered insights that proved surprisingly useful. When morning came, the stranger was gone. He had left no trace of his presence, no indication of where he'd gone or why. The gang searched for him, curious and a little concerned, but found nothing. It was as if he'd never been there at all. They still talk about the stranger sometimes, wondering who he was and what he wanted. Some think he was a Pinkerton spy, gathering information for the law. Others think he was something else entirely, something not quite human. The truth, whatever it is, remains a mystery. The story of the hidden valley. Somewhere in the mountains, there's a valley that's invisible from the outside, hidden by cliffs and canyons and tricks of the light. Those who find it describe a paradise. Green meadows, clear streams, abundant game, everything a person could need to live in peace. Hosea found it once by accident, while fleeing from a posse that was hot on his trail. He rode into a canyon that seemed to lead nowhere, followed it through twists and turns and emerged into the hidden valley. The posse never found him. They rode right past the canyon entrance without seeing it. He stayed in the valley for a week, resting, recovering, marveling at its beauty. There were no signs of human habitation, no indication that anyone had ever been there before. It was pristine, untouched, a secret that the world had somehow overlooked. When he left, Hosea tried to mark the route, to remember how to find the valley again. But the landmarks seemed to shift. The canyons seemed to rearrange themselves, and he was never able to find his way back. The valley had shown itself to him once, when he needed it, and then hidden itself again. Hosea has told the gang about the hidden valley, and they've searched for it themselves, but none of them have found it. Maybe it only reveals itself to those in desperate need. Maybe it's not a real place at all, but something else. A vision, or a dream, or a gift from forces beyond understanding. The legend of the Devil's Horseman. On certain nights, when the moon is dark and the wind is still, you can hear hoofbeats on the road. But when you look, there's nothing there. The Devil's Horseman rides unseen, collecting souls for his master. Bill heard this legend from an old woman in Strawberry who swore she'd seen the horseman herself. He appeared to her on the night her husband died, a figure in black on a horse made of shadow. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her presence, just rode past and vanished into the darkness. Her husband died an hour later. The horseman is said to appear whenever death is near, a herald of the end, a reminder that no one escapes forever. Some say he's the devil himself come to claim what's owed. Others say he's just a messenger, a servant doing his master's bidding. Bill doesn't believe in the Devil's Horseman, or at least he says he doesn't. But on dark nights, when the wind is still and the world is quiet, he listens for hoofbeats, and when he hears them, he holds his breath and waits for them to pass. The story of the sunken ship. Flatiron Lake holds many secrets, and one of them is a ship that sank decades ago, taking its cargo and crew to the bottom. Divers have tried to reach it, treasure hunters have searched for it, but the lake keeps its secrets well. The ship was a steamboat, carrying passengers and freight across the lake. It was a routine voyage, nothing special, until a storm came up without warning. The waves grew higher than the deck, the wind tore at the sails, and the ship began to take on water. The captain tried to reach shore, but the storm was too fierce. The ship went down in the middle of the lake, in water so deep that no one could reach it. Most of the passengers drowned. A few made it to shore and told the tale. Since then, fishermen have reported strange things on the lake. Lights beneath the surface moving slowly as if the ship is still sailing. Sounds of music and laughter drifting up from the depths. Glimpses of figures in the water, passengers who never reach their destination. The gang has fished in Flatiron Lake, has seen the lights and heard the sounds. They don't talk about it much. Some things are better left unexamined. But they know the ship is down there, and they know it's not alone. The tale of the fortune teller. In St. Denis, there's a fortune teller who's said to have genuine powers. She can see the future, read the past, know things that no one should know. People come from all over to consult her, hoping for guidance, fearing what they might learn. Arthur visited her once on a whim, not really believing, but curious enough to try. She sat him down in her dim parlour, took his hands and looked into his eyes. What she saw there made her flinch. She told him things about his past that no stranger could know. The death of his mother, the absence of his father, the choices he'd made and the prices he'd paid. She told him about the gang, about Dutch, about the path they were on, and then she told him about the future. Arthur doesn't talk about what she said. The words haunt him, keep him awake at night, make him question everything he thought he knew. He doesn't know if she was genuine or just a skilled cold reader, but her predictions have a way of coming true, and that terrifies him. The gang knows Arthur visited the fortune teller, but they don't press him for details. Some knowledge is too heavy to share, too dangerous to speak aloud. Whatever she told him, Arthur carries it alone, a burden that grows heavier with each passing day. The story of the escaped convict. Prisons are supposed to be inescapable, but every now and then someone proves that wrong. This story is about a convict who escaped from a maximum security prison and was never recaptured, despite the best efforts of the law. His name was Samuel, and he'd been sentenced to life for a crime he swore he didn't commit. He spent years planning his escape, studying the guards' routines, mapping the prison's layout, waiting for the perfect moment. When that moment came, he was ready. He slipped out of his cell, past the guards, over the walls into the night. The alarm was raised within minutes, but Samuel was already gone, vanishing into the wilderness like a ghost. The law searched for him for years, offered rewards, posted his picture in every town. But Samuel was never found. Some say he made it to Mexico, started a new life under a new name. Others say he died in the wilderness, free at last but alone. The gang admires Samuel, sees him as a kindred spirit. They're all running from something, all trying to stay one step ahead of the law. Samuel's story is proof that it can be done, that freedom is possible for those brave enough to seize it. The Legend of the Weeping Willow. There's a weeping willow by a river in the heartlands that's said to be haunted. People who sit beneath it hear whispers, feel presences, see things that aren't there. The tree has been there for as long as anyone can remember, and its reputation has only grown with time. The legend says that a woman hanged herself from the tree's branches, heartbroken over a love that could never be. Her spirit remains, bound to the tree, unable to move on. She whispers to those who sit beneath her branches, sharing her sorrow, seeking comfort that never comes. Lenny sat beneath the tree once, not knowing its history. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather, heard a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The voice was sad, so sad that Lenny felt tears on his cheeks without knowing why. He left quickly, unsettled by the experience. Later, when he learned the tree's history, he understood. The woman's grief was so powerful that it had soaked into the tree itself, becoming part of it, eternal and inescapable. The gang avoids the weeping willow now. They have enough sorrow of their own without taking on someone else's. But sometimes, when they pass by, they spare a thought for the woman who died there, and they hope she's found some peace. The story of the medicine show. Before the gang settled into their current life, some of them travelled with the medicine show, selling snake oil and false hope to desperate people. It's not something they're proud of, but it's part of their history, and sometimes they talk about it. The medicine show travelled from town to town, setting up in squares and fairgrounds, drawing crowds with music and spectacle. The star of the show was a man who called himself Dr. Miracle, who claimed his tonics could cure anything from baldness to broken hearts. The tonics were worthless, of course, nothing but coloured water and alcohol. But people believed in them, wanted to believe in them, and they paid good money for the promise of a cure. Dr. Miracle got rich, and his assistants got a cut. The show ended badly, as these things often do. A man died after drinking one of the tonics, and his family came looking for revenge. Dr. Miracle fled in the night, leaving his assistants to face the angry mob. Some of them made it out, some of them didn't. The gang members who survived learned a valuable lesson. There are easier ways to make money, and there are harder ways, but the easiest ways often have the highest costs. They moved on to other cons, other schemes, eventually finding their way to Dutch and his vision of a better life. The tale of the railroad baron. The railroads are changing the West, connecting cities, opening territories, making fortunes for the men who build them. But those fortunes come at a cost, paid by the workers who lay the tracks and the communities that get in the way. There's a railroad baron named Leviticus Cornwall who's become a symbol of everything the gang hates. He's rich beyond imagining, powerful beyond measure, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of profit. He's destroyed towns, displaced families, worked men to death, all in the name of progress. The gang has had run-ins with Cornwall, has stolen from him, has made themselves his enemies. He's responded with Pinkertons and bounty hunters, with rewards and threats, with all the resources his wealth can buy. The conflict between them is personal now, a war that neither side can afford to lose. Dutch sees Cornwall as the embodiment of everything wrong with America, the greed and corruption that's destroying the frontier. Cornwall sees Dutch as a nuisance, a pest to be exterminated. Neither of them is entirely wrong, and neither of them is entirely right. The story of Cornwall is still being written, its ending unknown. But the gang knows that their fates are intertwined, that the conflict between them will shape the future in ways they can't predict. It's a dangerous game they're playing, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The legend of the ghost town. There are ghost towns scattered across the frontier, places that boomed and busted, that thrived and died, that now stand empty as monuments to failed dreams. This story is about one of them, a town called Pleasance that was abandoned under mysterious circumstances. Pleasance was a mining town, built around a silver strike that promised to make everyone rich. For a few years, it delivered on that promise. The town grew, prospered, attracted people from all over looking for their share of the wealth. Then the silver ran out, as silver always does. The mine closed, the jobs disappeared, and people began to leave. But that's not why Pleasance became a ghost town. Other mining towns survived the end of their mines, found new industries, adapted and endured. Pleasance didn't adapt. It died suddenly and completely in a single night. The last residents simply vanished, leaving behind everything they owned. No one knows what happened to them. No bodies were ever found, no explanations ever offered. The town still stands, preserved by the dry climate, a snapshot of a moment frozen in time. Visitors report feeling watched, hearing footsteps, seeing shadows that move on their own. Something happened in Pleasance, something that left a mark on the place itself, and whatever it was, it's still there, waiting. The story of the bounty hunter. Bounty hunters are a constant threat to the gang, men and women who hunt outlaws for money. Most of them are predictable, motivated by greed, easy to evade or eliminate. But there's one bounty hunter who's different, who's become almost legendary in his relentlessness. His name is unknown. The gang just calls him the Hunter. He's been tracking them for years, always one step behind, never giving up. He's come close to catching them several times, close enough that they've seen his face, learned to recognize his methods. The hunter doesn't seem to care about the money. He's turned down offers to call off the chase, refused bribes that would have made him rich. He's driven by something else, something personal, something that makes the gang's capture a matter of honor rather than profit. Arthur has faced the hunter directly, in confrontations that left both of them wounded. There's a respect between them, the kind that exists between worthy adversaries. Arthur knows that someday one of them will kill the other. He just hopes he's the one who walks away. The gang tells stories about the hunter around the campfire, part warning and part admiration. He's everything they're not, lawful, persistent, patient. In another life he might have been one of them. In this life he's their nemesis, and they can never forget that he's out there, hunting. The tale of the secret society. St. Denis is full of secrets, and one of the biggest is the secret society that's said to control the city from the shadows. They're called the Colonians, and their beliefs are as strange as their influence is vast. The Chelonians worship the turtle, seeing it as a symbol of wisdom and longevity. They believe that by emulating the turtle, by withdrawing from the world and its troubles, they can achieve a kind of immortality. Their members include some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in St. Denis. The gang has encountered the Chelonians, has seen their rituals, has wondered at their beliefs. They seem harmless, even ridiculous, but there's something unsettling about them. Their certainty, their devotion, their willingness to abandon everything for their faith. Some say the Colonians are just a social club, a way for rich people to feel special. Others say they're something more, a genuine cult with genuine power. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. The story of the artist. There's an artist who lives in a cabin in the woods, painting pictures of the frontier that capture something no photograph ever could. His work is sought after by collectors, displayed in galleries, praised by critics. But the artist himself remains a mystery. Charles met him once while hunting in the area. The artist was set up by a stream, painting the landscape with quick, confident strokes. Charles watched for a while, fascinated by the way the artist transformed the scene before him into something more, something that captured not just the appearance but the essence of the place. They talked briefly. The artist was friendly but guarded, reluctant to share details about his life or his work. He said he painted because he had to, because the images demanded to be captured, because the frontier was disappearing, and someone needed to preserve it. Charles has thought about the artist often since then, wondered what drives someone to dedicate their life to capturing beauty. The gang's life is about survival, about taking what they need to keep going. The artist's life is about something else, something Charles doesn't fully understand but respects, the legend of the sleeping giant. In the mountains, there's a rock formation that looks like a giant lying on his back, sleeping. The locals call it the sleeping giant, and they have stories about what will happen when he wakes. The giant was a god, they say, who grew tired of the world and lay down to rest. He's been sleeping for thousands of years, dreaming dreams that shape the world around him. The mountains are his blanket, the rivers are his tears, the wind is his breath. When the giant wakes, the world will change. Some say he'll destroy everything, angry at what humanity has done to his creation. Others say he'll heal the world, restore it to the paradise it once was. No one knows for sure because no one has ever seen him wake. The gang has seen the sleeping giant, has marvelled at the way the rocks form a perfect human shape. It's probably just a coincidence, just the random work of erosion and time. But on quiet nights, when the wind sounds like breathing and the mountains seem to shift, it's easy to believe that something ancient is sleeping there, waiting for the right moment to open its eyes. The story of the last stand. Every outlaw knows that someday the law will catch up with them. The lucky ones die quickly in a blaze of glory. The unlucky ones are captured, tried, hanged. This story is about an outlaw who chose to go out fighting and the legend he left behind. His name was Black Jack, and he was one of the most wanted men in the West. He'd robbed banks and trains, killed lawmen and bounty hunters, evaded capture for over a decade. But eventually his luck ran out. The law cornered him in a canyon, surrounded him with 100 men, demanded his surrender. Blackjack knew he couldn't escape, knew that capture meant the gallows. So he made a choice. He fought. For 3 days he held off the posse, picking them off one by one from his position in the rocks. He was wounded, exhausted, running low on ammunition, but he kept fighting. The lawmen couldn't believe one man could cause so much trouble. On the 3rd day, Blackjack made his final stand. He walked out of the rocks, guns blazing, taking down 6 men before they brought him down. He died on his feet, defiant to the end, a legend born in blood and gun smoke. The gang tells Blackjack's story with admiration and a little fear. They know they might face the same choice someday, might have to decide between surrender and a last stand. They hope, when that day comes, they'll have the courage to go out like Blackjack did, the tale of the travelling preacher. Religion on the frontier takes many forms, and one of the most colourful is the travelling preacher who brings the word of God to communities too small or too remote to have their own church. This story is about one such preacher whose faith was tested in ways he never expected. His name was Brother Elijah, and he travelled the frontier for 30 years, preaching to anyone who would listen. He baptized babies, married couples, buried the dead. He was a fixture of frontier life, known and respected by everyone he met. But Brother Elijah had doubts, the same doubts that plague anyone who thinks deeply about faith. He wondered if God was real, if his preaching made any difference, if the comfort he offered was genuine or just a pleasant lie. One night, alone in the wilderness, he prayed for a sign. He asked God to show him something, anything, that would prove his faith was justified. He prayed all night, and when dawn came, he had his answer. What he saw, he never told anyone. But from that day forward, his doubts were gone. He preached with a conviction that moved even the most hardened sinners, a certainty that came from somewhere beyond human understanding. He died peacefully years later, with a smile on his face and a prayer on his lips. The gang doesn't know what Brother Elijah saw that night, and they're not sure they want to know. Faith is a personal thing, and some experiences are too sacred to share. But his story is a reminder that there's more to the world than what we can see and touch, and that sometimes, if we ask sincerely, we receive answers. The story of the hidden treasure. Every outlaw dreams of finding hidden treasure, a fortune buried by someone who died before they could retrieve it. This story is about a treasure that's said to be hidden somewhere in the Grizzlies, waiting for someone clever enough to find it. The treasure belonged to a gang of outlaws who operated in the mountains decades ago. They were successful, accumulating wealth from dozens of robberies, but they were also paranoid. They didn't trust banks, didn't trust each other, didn't trust anyone. So they buried their treasure in a location known only to the gang's leader. They planned to retrieve it when the heat died down, when they could enjoy their wealth in peace. But the heat never died down. The law caught up with them, one by one, until only the leader remained. The leader died in a shootout, taking the secret of the treasure's location with him. Since then, treasure hunters have searched the Grizzlies, following clues and rumours, hoping to find the fortune that's waiting somewhere in those frozen peaks. The gang has heard the stories, has even done some searching of their own. They haven't found anything yet, but the dream persists. Somewhere in the mountains there's a fortune waiting to be claimed, and someday, maybe, they'll be the ones to claim it, the legend of the eternal flame. Deep in a cave in the Grizzlies there's a flame that's been burning for as long as anyone can remember. It never goes out, never dims, never seems to consume any fuel. The locals call it the eternal flame, and they have many theories about its origin. Some say it's a natural phenomenon, gas escaping from deep in the earth and igniting somehow. Others say it's supernatural, a fire lit by gods or spirits, a beacon for those who know how to read its light. Charles has seen the eternal flame, has sat before it and felt its warmth. It's real, whatever its origin, a fire that burns without fuel, that gives light without consuming. He didn't stay long. The cave felt sacred, and he didn't want to intrude. The eternal flame is a reminder that the world is full of wonders, things that science can't explain, mysteries that may never be solved. The gang lives in a world of violence and survival, but there's beauty too if you know where to look. The story of the reformed outlaw. Not every outlaw dies with their boots on. Some manage to leave the life behind, to start over, to become respectable citizens. This story is about one such outlaw whose transformation gives the gang hope that maybe, someday, they can do the same. His name was Thomas, and he was one of the most notorious outlaws of his generation. He robbed, he killed, he lived outside the law for 20 years. Then, one day, he simply stopped. No one knows exactly what changed him. Some say he found religion, others say he fell in love. Whatever the reason, Thomas turned himself in, served his time, and emerged from prison a different man. He moved to a small town, opened a general store, married a widow with 2 children. He became a pillar of the community, respected and admired by everyone who knew him. His past was forgotten, or at least forgiven, and he lived out his days in peace. Thomas died in his bed, surrounded by family at the age of 73. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, none of whom knew about the man he'd been before. He'd managed something that most outlaws only dream of: a second chance, a new life, a happy ending. The gang tells Thomas's story when they need to believe that there's a way out, that the outlaw life doesn't have to end in blood and bullets. It's a slim hope, but it's hope nonetheless, and sometimes that's enough. The tale of the mysterious illness. Sickness is a constant threat on the frontier, where doctors are scarce and medicine is primitive. This story is about an illness that swept through a town, killing dozens, and the desperate measures people took to survive. The illness came without warning, striking the young and old alike. It started with a fever, progressed to delirium, and ended in death. The doctors didn't know what it was, didn't know how to treat it, could only watch as their patients died. The town was quarantined, cut off from the outside world to prevent the illness from spreading. Inside, people prayed and panicked, tried folk remedies and patent medicines, did anything they could think of to save themselves and their loved ones. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the illness disappeared. The fever broke, the dying recovered, and life returned to normal. No one ever figured out what had caused the illness or why it had stopped. It was just one of those things, a mystery that the frontier produces and never explains. The gang has seen illness take its toll, has lost friends to diseases that had no cure. The story of the mysterious illness is a reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change. It makes them appreciate the health they have, the time they have, the people they have. The story of the wild horses. The frontier is home to herds of wild horses, descendants of animals that escaped from ranches and missions that have lived free for generations. They're beautiful and untamable, symbols of the freedom that the gang cherishes. Arthur has a special connection with horses, an understanding that goes beyond words. He spent hours watching the wild herds, admiring their grace and power, wishing he could join them in their endless wandering. He caught a wild horse once, a magnificent stallion that fought him every step of the way. It took weeks to earn the horse's trust, to convince it that Arthur wasn't a threat. But eventually they reached an understanding, a partnership based on mutual respect. That horse became Arthur's favourite, his companion through countless adventures. It died in a shootout, taking a bullet meant for Arthur, and he's never quite gotten over the loss. But he still watches the wild herds when he can, still dreams of the freedom they represent. The wild horses are a reminder that freedom exists, that not everything's been tamed and fenced and controlled. As long as they run free, there's hope for the gang too. The legend of the moonlit dance. On certain nights, When the moon is full and the conditions are right, you can see figures dancing in the meadows. They're not human, or at least not entirely human, and their dance is something no living person has ever been able to replicate. Mary Beth saw them once while travelling alone through the heartlands. She was making camp when she heard music, faint and strange, coming from a nearby meadow. She followed the sound and found them. Dozens of figures, glowing faintly in the moonlight, dancing in patterns that seemed to have meaning she couldn't quite grasp. She watched for hours, transfixed by the beauty of the dance. The figures never acknowledged her presence, never seemed to notice she was there. They just danced, endlessly, as if the dance itself was the purpose, as if nothing else mattered. When dawn came, the figures faded, and Mary Beth was left alone in the meadow. She's never been able to find them again, though she's tried. The moonlit dance was a gift, a glimpse of something beyond the ordinary world, and she treasures the memory. The gang listens to Mary Beth's story with wonder. They've all had experiences that defy explanation, moments when the world seemed larger and stranger than they'd imagined. The moonlit dance is just one more thread in the tapestry of mysteries that makes the frontier so fascinating. The story of the old gunfighter. Every young outlaw dreams of being the fastest gun in the West, but the old gunfighters know the truth. Speed kills, but it also gets you killed. This story is about a gunfighter who lived long enough to learn that lesson. His name was Cole, and in his prime, he was unbeatable. He'd faced dozens of challenges, killed them all, built a reputation that made men cross the street to avoid him. He was feared and respected, a legend in his own time. But legends attract challengers, and challengers never stop coming. Cole spent his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next young gun who wanted to make a name by killing him. He couldn't relax, couldn't settle down, couldn't live a normal life. Eventually he got tired. He hung up his guns, moved to a small town, tried to disappear. But his reputation followed him, and the challengers kept coming. He killed them, one after another, until he realized that he'd never be free, that his past would haunt him until the day he died. Cole is still alive somewhere, still waiting for the next challenger. He's old now, slow, a shadow of the gunfighter he once was. But he's still dangerous, still capable of killing anyone foolish enough to test him, and he's still tired, still wishing for a peace that will never come. The gang sees themselves in Cole's story, sees the future that might await them if they live long enough. The outlaw life is exciting, but it's also exhausting, a constant struggle that never ends. Cole's story is a warning. Be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. The tale of the river crossing. Rivers are obstacles on the frontier, barriers that have to be crossed, sometimes at great risk. This story is about a river crossing that went wrong, and the lessons the gang learned from it. They were fleeing from a posse, riding hard, desperate to put distance between themselves and the law. They came to a river swollen with spring runoff, moving fast and dangerous. They had to cross. There was no other way. Dutch went first, his horse struggling against the current. He made it, barely, and waved for the others to follow. One by one they entered the water, fighting the current, praying they'd make it to the other side. Sean didn't make it. His horse stumbled, went under, and Sean was swept away. They searched for him downstream, found him clinging to a rock, half drowned but alive. It was a miracle, the kind that makes you believe in something beyond luck. The gang learned from that crossing. They learned to respect the river, to scout for safer crossings, to never underestimate the power of moving water. Sean still jokes about his near-death experience, but there's a seriousness beneath the humour. He knows how close he came, and he's never forgotten. Make sure to subscribe. Thanks for listening to the end.